oh, oh, give me Jesus.
Do I get Jesus? Yay, because that means I get to move and stare at you all, make you feel uncomfortable with me. I'm so glad to be back. Mark and I both have had sort of like a wilderness experience this past 2 weeks. He is in Alaska still. He's been there for, it'll be 3 weeks this Tuesday. We've both decided that that's way too long and we don't want to ever do that again. But he is doing well. He probably looks like Grizzly Adams. I don't know what he looks like. We should just play a joke on him when he comes back next week. Just pretend you don't recognize him. Like, what happened to our pastor? Oh, no, just pretend he's a newcomer. Like, would you like a welcome packet? Here you go. We've got a nice little, how about a name tag? He'll be like, no, I'm your pastor. So I will let him share all of his bear tales next week, of which there are plenty. It was an interesting experience because he went to Alaska and I went to Ireland on a mission trip. So we were on opposite ends of the globe, 9 hours apart, and we had no communication at all for 2 weeks. Like no texting, no contact at all. The only way I knew he was alive was because of a lady named Vicky. Hi, Vicky. I know she's watching right now from Sicily. Vicky, man, what would we have done without each other? So Vicky, who's watching right now, she said she would, is the wife of Mark's travel partner, Warren. And so Mark's communication device was not working, his satellite connector. And so we had no way of knowing if he was dead or alive or where he was, except for Warren, whose device was working. So every day he would get one message to Italy saying, we're alive, or whatever happened. And then she would get the message to me in Ireland. And so it was like this Morse code going back and forth. But we made it. Vicky and I, we were like, just like praying for our guys, and they are fine. And again, I will not steal his thunder. I'm sure he's got many, many stories to tell. Meanwhile, I was over in Ireland doing my thing. Many of you know that I feel a particular calling to the nation of Ireland that has been on my heart since I was a child. And so for the past 15 or so years, I travel to Ireland once or twice a year, go wherever I have an opportunity to share the gospel. I've been in the Teen Challenge Centers. I've been in the Northern Irish prison system. I speak in a lot of churches, or really wherever the door is open. And the marvelous part about the ministry is God is so smart. Did you ever notice that? He's a pretty smart guy. Like, he's got some things figured out. And so, he gives me this gift of being able to play the violin, which also doubles as a fiddle. And so, I can go into remote locations in Ireland where the farming population is not interested in a churchy experience, but if they hear there's a musician in town, they will come to a free concert. Isn't that brilliant? So they think they're coming to a music concert. How funny is that? And then they get there and it's me. It's like, sorry. But it's just brilliant, because it's the most brilliant setup ever, because who doesn't love music? And especially if you're an Irish farmer, in some remote area where they don't have a lot of live music, this is a real treat. And so to give you an example, I landed in Ireland on Tuesday. As I've gotten older, I give myself a little more grace. I used to get off the plane, drink some coffee, and I was on stage that night, and it's like, no, there's no need for that. So I give myself a day to chill and remember how to drive on the right side of the road with shifting with my left hand and not hitting anything. And I didn't stall at all. I was so proud. I didn't stall. I was like, yes, I can do this. So I get used to driving on the roads and get used to eating potatoes 24 hours a day. And we're in the groove. And my first venue was a little church in West Cork where I'd never been, tiny little church. And the pastor she's a lady, and she says to me, she says, Najim, she says, you can't start the meeting before 8 o'clock p.m. because the farmers have to milk their cows. They won't be coming to an event before 8. You know, it's like, okay. So I did. It was so cute because I started to sing. And, of course, the sound system, oh, my gosh. I walked in there. I was like, well, okay. Guess we'll be doing this a cappella. I'm like plugging in wires. I'm like, where's Jim Metzger when you need him? It's like, oh, my gosh. So I plugged something in somehow and got some sound. And I brought a microphone. And it was so cute. You know, I was singing my little songs, and these farmers start dribbling in the door. And they're like, is this free? Is this free? You know, is there a charge for this event? And he's like, nope. You know, and they just come in. It was just so precious. And they're just like, it's music. It's music. And then I share my story and the testimony and the gospel of Jesus Christ. And they're willing to receive it because they're getting to know me as a person. And the violins melted all of their hearts, so they're all on the floor. So it was absolutely wonderful. So I want to just show you a few pictures of some of what this looked like. Everywhere I'm going, these pictures are little encounters with God. And so this building that you're looking at here, this is Limerick Christian Center. I think I've told you the history a little bit. I won't do too much today, except that building there is the result of an encounter with God. A small band of believers in the center of Ireland who were persecuted and could not find a room to meet in without being pushed around. They were Bible-believing Christians, and they prayed for one room. They said, God, just give us a room. Just give us a room where we can meet. And my friend Dorothy Hall had a dream, and in the dream, she saw a word, mungret. Mungret. She went and asked her Irish friend, what's a mungret? And her friend said, Mungret is a town outside of Limerick. I'll take you there. And the Lord took them to this building, which is now Limerick Christian Center. It's a church. It's a Christian school. It's become a Bible college and a coffee house. All because of an encounter with God and a prayer and asking for a room. Look what God gave them. So go on to the next one. Oh, so this is another encounter with God. The lady I'm standing next to, the little girl between us, is a miracle baby that the Lord had shown my friend Michelle that she was going to have a baby girl years past, and she couldn't have kids, or it was difficult to have kids. I said, trust me, you're going to have a little girl. You're going to have a little girl. And a few months later, I said, you're going to send me that text that says you're pregnant, and I'm going to say, I told you so, told you so, told you so, told you so. So that little girl, there is the miracle baby, the result of that prayer. That's Phoebe. Go on. This lady, she's one of the faithful ones. She was how can I say this, shunned by her family because of her faith. And she was willing to leave family relationships to call herself a Christian. And she was one of those early prayer warriors that prayed for that room and is now living in the house that God gave them. That's Kathleen. These are all out of order, but that's okay. That's a little centerpiece. I have an established relationship with some of these churches, and they love me. So out of honor for me, look at the centerpieces they made. Isn't that precious? The little violins. Oh, this is the inside of the church in Limerick. Took a lot of work to get it to that condition, but there it is, a thriving congregation. There's the inside of the school, Limerick Christian School. Oh, these are definitely out of order. That's all right. This is a place called Knock, where I did ministry all week long. I went to several churches. I was in a different church every day. The last day of my trip, my friend Michelle took me to this place called Knock. It's a Catholic shrine. This is a place where they believe Mary appeared, Mary, Joseph, and one of the apostles, forget who. There was this apparition in the late 1800s. It's very controversial because the Catholics believe this is a holy place. The Protestants generally do not. And so she took me there just kind of so I could see this tourist attraction. And God met me there and spoke to me in that room. I said, God's speaking to me, Michelle, I can't leave. I'm having an encounter with God. I don't care what it's called. I don't care if this is right or wrong, Catholic, Protestant. This is a place where people are coming to seek him, and he's meeting me here. So I had a marvelous word from the Lord in that room. I didn't want to leave. Last Sunday, I was right here in this little building, built about 1740. This was the only church in Ireland that John Wesley dedicated. So it's a lot of fun for me to stand in the front and do my ministry, because I always feel like I get to stand where John Wesley stood. This is so much fun. So I love that congregation. They're a lot of fun. Oh, that's an Irish breakfast. Who can guess what the black stuff is in the middle? Anybody know? It's not haggis. This is blood pudding. This is Ireland. And so the black stuff in the middle is blood pudding. Don't even ask. But it's really good if you just close your eyes and don't think about what it is. It's wonderful. Absolutely. And then we have the white pudding, which is made from the brains of the... They don't waste anything. Come on. But when in Ireland, you eat like the Irish. Monday, I had a chance to go to... this is Crowpatrick. This is St. Patrick's Mountain, where he supposedly spent 40 days praying and fasting. I didn't get to the hike to the top, but next year we're going to hike. Oh, this was the rest of the decorations. I did a women's conference in Dublin last Saturday from 9 to 4. That was a large meeting. Again, just the result of an encounter with God, a husband and wife who cried out to God on their knees for Ireland. And now their church has grown into a mega church. They're in the thousands, and they meet in the National Boxing Stadium. So I did their women's conference, which was absolutely wonderful. And what's next? Is that it? This is their version of the coffee hour after church. I love how the little children serve the biscuits and coffee and tea and whatnot. That was in Castlebar. Another encounter with God. This lady was at the conference. She came up to me. She said, "Do you remember?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know if I remember. I see a lot of faces." She said, "You prayed for me years ago, and God has heard our prayers, and I received my answer." So she was filled with joy to share with me what had happened in our encounter with him together. There's another picture going up Crowpatrick, the mountain, place of encounter. Lovely little family in the Midlands of Ireland. These kids were just delightful. That's what it looks like flying in. The whole country just really looks like that. Their infrastructure is very primitive. There are a few main highways, but once you get off the highway, I think you'll see the next picture, you're there. That is a 2-lane road. That is traffic traveling both directions in that space, and that's generous. You can actually get off the road. Sometimes the road will look like that. Again, this is 2 directions. There'll be a car coming right at you, and sometimes there'll be stone walls on both sides. So then what do? Like, you just pray, "Oh God, please let there be no oncoming traffic." There's no room. But seriously, most of the roads off the main highways look like that. That's 2 directions, and that's probably it. Is that it? That's all my pictures. So, really, the entire trip is just, I told you guys so many times, we are living, breathing, walking, talking tabernacles of the Holy Spirit. If you've accepted Jesus in your heart, then God is living inside of you, and as you embrace that reality, wherever you go, he's going to go with you, and he's going to start working through your body and your mouth to love people and to introduce them to Jesus Christ, because that's what he wants to do. We are his body. So he does that with all of us, but in me, he does that by creating that encounter with God in that unique particular place of Ireland. So let me pull up my notes really quick. And God has this really interesting way of meeting us in the places where we least expect to meet him. You ever noticed that? He loves to just show up and surprise us. I wish he'd give us more notice sometimes, or, come when we expect him to come. He doesn't do that. A lot of times he will show up when we don't expect him to, but often when we need him the most is where he'll encounter us. and where he'll speak to us and where he will change us. So I want to share with you a story in the Word about one of those encounters. This is from Genesis 16. Do we have that whole chapter? So, you know what? I forgot to do the prayers, Dave, but I'll incorporate prayers at the end. Dave's having a heart attack because I forgot to do the congregational prayer. We'll get there. All right. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid, perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Then Sarai said to Abram, "My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me." So Abram said to Sarai, "Indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please." And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, an unexpected place, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She said, "I'm fleeing from the presence of my mistress, Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand." Then the angel of the Lord said to her, "I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees." For she said, "Have I also here seen him who sees me?" Therefore the well was called Bir Lahai Roi. Observe, it's between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. This is the word of the Lord. So this is a really messy story here in Genesis 16 that is seldom preached in church because it's just messy. I mean, like, this is, soap opera drama here. Sarai wants to have a child. God has promised her a child. God's promised Abram a child, but he's obviously late. Like, God is not on the schedule. He's maybe forgotten, and so he obviously needs help. And so Sarai says, "I think God is waiting for us to help him because he's not strong enough to accomplish his plan without us. So let's go help him." And many of you know, whenever we try to help God, it always turns into a train wreck, doesn't it? He doesn't need our help. He's waiting for our faith. But they didn't fully trust God. They took matters into their own hands, and they used a woman called Hagar to bear a son for Abraham in striving to fulfill God's purpose. So this narrative here is really tragic because Hagar is an Egyptian slave. We don't know how she comes into Abraham's, into their household. Earlier in Genesis, Abram and Sarai were traveling through Egypt, so we can imagine maybe, Sarai says, "Hey, I need an extra maid. I need some extra servants, some slaves. Can you go buy another one?" And he picks out Hagar, brings her. This is tragedy because, first of all, she's born into slavery. She has no worth, no value at all. In fact, her name, Hagar, means flight. And babies don't name themselves. So who named Hagar? Her mom, her parents. So I don't know about you, does anybody want to name your kid Flight? Like, I think I'm going to name my kid Trauma or Abuse. I think I'll name my kid Trouble because, but that's all they knew. And they were suffering so deeply that they named their child what their experience was. So this child is named by her past, and she finds herself in this terrible situation, really trafficked, and used for her body to produce a child for someone else. I mean, it's just terrible. It's the ultimate devaluing of a human being, and yet here she is. She has absolutely no value at all, but God gives her value, even the way the story is written. I want to do some more teaching from the Old Testament, whether it's in ladies' ministry or here, because in my study of the Old Testament, I studied the Torah this year, and something I discovered is that the Torah is written differently than Western literature. It's written through these things called chiasms, these poems, which show you in the poem what the important part is. So guess who the important part of this story is? It's not Ishmael. It's Hagar. The story is written as a poem, and the very center of that poem is Hagar, where the angel finds her and says, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from? Where are you going? That's what God wants us to see, is this encounter between holiness and desperate faith. Hagar had likely never known love. She had no reason for hope in her life. She had been named by her past. What would have happened to Hagar if God hadn't met her there? What do you think? She's out in the desert. She doesn't know anybody. She has no family. She has no friends. She's going to die. So in her mind, her past is flight and her future is death. And there's just no choice. This is what she's been assigned by life. But God saw Hagar. He sees her, and he sees her heart. He sees in this Egyptian slave a heart of faith. And there's, we just even wonder, she was not a Hebrew. She likely did not know the God of the Hebrews. But God doesn't care about that. He doesn't care about religion. He cares about, is that heart of that man or woman something that can believe in me, something that can see me, someone that can trust that I see them. That's all he's looking for. That's why when I went to that place called Knock, which was so controversial, and people said, oh, this is not holy, God's not there. It doesn't matter what it looks like. God doesn't care about those external things. He's looking for the heart of one who will seek him. And so the external things no longer matter. And that's what God sees in her, is the heart of one who will seek him. And even as she was running from her past, she could not outrun God's purpose for her life. God met her right in the middle of her mess and asked, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from? Where are you going? And of course, God already knew the answer to those questions. The angel named her past, Flight, slave of Sarai. And then he named her future. He gave her a promise. He said, you're not going to die. In fact, I'm going to increase your descendants so much that they'll be too numerous to count. And you notice in this encounter, God doesn't focus on her past. He doesn't meet her and say, oh, Hagar, I'm so sorry for what they did to you. Those terrible people, I'm just going to call down fire on them because they were awful to you, and blame and pity me and pity me. He doesn't even discuss that. He meets her in the now. And he says, I already know all that. I know where you've come from. We're not going to discuss that. I'm meeting you here, and we're going to discuss this. Not what you think your future is, but what I'm going to name your future. So he gives her this amazing promise, and then he tells her in Genesis 16:10, go back to your mistress and submit to her. Now that's a very interesting statement, because he gives her the promise, but the promise is somewhat conditional. He's saying, in order to inherit this promise, you have to do something. You've got to go back and deal with your mess. And when I minister to people in my travels, so often I'll meet people. They want a miracle. They want that future. They want all the good stuff. But they're sitting there in a mess that they're not willing to deal with. They're not willing to go back into it and say, why did I get to where I am in the first place? What am I responsible for that I need to fix? Who do I need to forgive? Not, oh, those terrible people, this terrible life, none of that. Who am I willing to forgive? What do I need to do to get healing in my heart? What do I need to pursue to get freedom from addiction? What is the work that God is asking me to do so that I'm ready to inherit that? Because you can't inherit this if all of this stuff hasn't been dealt with. It's not that any of that stuff from your past will change, but God needs your heart to change so that you're completely free of that past so that you can receive the future that He has for you. And as we have courage to meet God, listen, in our pain and not run from the pain, He'll show you what to do with that pain so that you can run into the fruitful future that He's made you for. So part of that I need to say again, having the courage to meet God in the pain. And that's really hard because nobody likes pain. We don't want to experience that. We want to just move on. We want to distract ourselves, numb ourselves out. And God is saying, as long as you keep distracting and numbing out and refusing to forgive, refusing to figure out that, that past, you won't inherit your future. Meet Him in the pain. Have the courage to do it. And that's challenging, isn't it? Mark knows about that. Meet Him in the pain. Meet Him in the mess. Stop running from it. Stop making excuses for it. Stop blaming everybody else for it. Be willing to meet Him in the midst of it and say, God, what is it about me that needs to change? Many times we stay stuck in life because we aren't willing to endure the discomfort that we have to go through to grow. We don't want to go through that discomfort. We want the, guys, I want all the muscles. I want the perfect body, but I don't want to go to the gym every day. You can't have it. It's like you've got to do the work, and work is what it is, and there is pain there. But that in that encounter, that courageous encounter with God, in your pain is where the transformation is going to come. A friend of mine asked me in Ireland, she says, how come God speaks to you, but He doesn't speak to me? You're the lucky one. You're so lucky. God speaks to you. Look at you. You're just blessed. I'm like, no, I'm not blessed. I am blessed. He speaks to me because I have met Him in the hard places of life and have cried out to Him for survival. Oh, God, help me. Show me where I need to change, instead of running from it. And in those times of intimacy with God and struggle with God is where I've learned to hear His voice. And you can too if you don't run from Him. He's a marvelous God, and He's full of love and full of mercy. But you have to take that step of courage to say, I want to know that God. I want to get close to that God. I want to know His voice. And you can if you're willing to meet Him right where you are, in the painful places. God knows where you are. And just because it's not a comfortable place right now doesn't mean you're in the wrong place. Don't give in to the temptation of running from your current discomfort or pain or disappointment or fear. You don't know what God might be doing in that discomfort. In fact, what kind of transformation ever happens without discomfort? What baby was ever born without pain? If you had your kids without pain, I don't want to hear about it. I gave birth to 4 kids. They all hurt, okay? It hurt. Am I glad I gave birth? Yes. Would I go through that pain again? Yes, I think. But, pain could actually indicate the birth of something new in your life that will come no other way. Don't be afraid of it. If I'm giving you any word today, it's have courage. Have courage. Go there. Trust God to meet you there. Trust Him to get you through it because He will. And you're not going to die in the desert if you'll be willing to meet with Him. Sometimes when we're in a situation a long time, even if it's dysfunctional, that situation, that bondage that we're in becomes comfortable and feels safe because it's all we know. Like an abusive relationship can become safe because it's familiar, feels safe. Sometimes bondage feels safer than freedom. Even if we want freedom, we're not willing to press through that pain to get to freedom. Does that make sense? So I'm here on the other side saying, press through. It's worth it. You don't want to stay in that desert. You want to get through to the land of fruitfulness. I've met so many people who wear their past like a calling card. And this is true. I meet people all the time. They come forward for prayer or whatever. They'd say, hello, my name is so-and-so. I was abused as a child. My father abused me. Hello, my name is so-and-so. I suffer from PTSD. I hear that one all the time. I suffer from PTSD. Hello, my name is so-and-so. Whatever it is. They name themselves from their past. And then guess what? Guess what their future is going to look like? It's going to look like what they have named it. Do you know that you have the authority to name your future? You have the authority to name your future and call it forth. And you're probably already doing it and you don't know it. I do it. I was in Ireland last year. I didn't intend to tell you this, but I will. I was sharing with a friend of mine who became a Christian in the time that I knew her. Had a miraculous encounter with God, absolutely stunning. This lady was not a believer at all. And within a year's time, she was on fire for Christ, and I just love her to pieces. So I was at her house, and we were just sitting around late at night and just chatting about our lives. And all of a sudden, she stops me, and she says, Jean, stop. I was like, stop what? What are you doing? She says, I am tired of it. All I hear you talk about is your past. All I hear you talk about is your failure. All I hear you talk about is your screw-ups, and then how your screw-ups led to your kids' screw-ups, and how that's your fault too, and therefore their problems are your fault and all that. She says, stop it. I don't want to hear about that anymore. She says, you have got salt in your boots. I was like, oh, she's a baby Christian. Like, oh my gosh, God's speaking to her. Oh Lord. She's absolutely right. I had salt in my boots. I wasn't moving forward into the freedom and the fruitfulness God had yet for me because I was still blaming myself for my past. And like, God has forgiven that. He's already forgotten it. Why do you keep bringing it up? Leave it. Get the salt out of your boots and walk forward. She says, I want to hear about what God's doing in your life right now. And I want to hear about the glorious things that he's pulling you into in the future. That's what we want to discuss. And I'm like, oh. And I led her to Christ. Oh, she's this baby Christian. She's amazing. It's salt in my boots. Do you have salt in your boots? I'm shaking the salt out of my boots. And so anyway, I was naming my future by my past. We don't have to. When we name our future as our past, we remain stuck. But if we'll meet God in our pain and allow him to heal us from the past, he'll set us free to run into the future that he has named for us. God has named a future for you. If you'll believe him. Hagar met God in her pain, and she got to be the first human being on the planet to name God. She named him El Roi, the God who sees. An Egyptian slave gets to name God Almighty. Is that not stunning? She's the first person to do it. And not only that, God esteems her so highly, it's going to make me cry. He gives her an inheritance that is equal to Abraham's. If you don't believe me, I'm going to read it to you right now. Her inheritance is right here, Genesis 16:10. The angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly. They shall not be counted for multitude. The previous chapter, we rewind to Genesis 15:5. This is Abram's promise from God. God took Abram outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars if you can count them. So shall your offspring be. The same promise, the same blessing given to the father of our faith and an Egyptian slave. Is that not stunning? Here's a brave little woman who's willing to meet with God in her pain. And he says, because of your faith, I'm going to name your future. You're not going to name your future. Abram's not going to name your future. Your parents are not going to name your future. Your past is not going to name your future. Because you're willing to look at me, I'm going to name it. And I'm going to call him Ishmael. You're going to have a son. Anybody know here what Ishmael means? It means God will hear. My future is I know my God. He's seen me. And my future is he will hear me. He's going to hear my prayers. And we're going to have conversations. And I'm going to know him. And he's going to know me. And I'm going to walk into his promise for me. And you know what? We're still living in the promise that he gave to Hagar. Ishmael was born. And Ishmael was a wild donkey of a man and a difficult personality. But guess how many sons he had? 12. Who else had 12 sons? Jacob, the son of Abraham. So Abraham's grandson, I think I got that right, because Abraham had Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons, became the 12 tribes of Israel. She has 12 tribes, the same. Now those 12 tribes, the descendants from those tribes became the religion of Islam. They're the Muslims today. And before you say, well, those bad, evil, horrible people over there, they're the sons of Abraham as well. And you and I don't know the end of the story. And those Muslims are having dreams and encounters with Christ all the time. You could see it in the news. God's not finished with that religion, and he has promises for them. And somehow he's using the descendants of Hagar to bring about his kingdom. I don't understand it, especially as we see war in the Middle East. I don't understand, but it's all part of his plan. And we don't have to be afraid of that. Those are the sons and daughters of Hagar. Can you see how Hagar's encounter with God changed her life? How would you be different if on the way home from church today you had an encounter with God and he spoke to you? How would it change you? How would it change the way you think about yourself? Would you feel pretty special? Would it change your self-esteem? It changed mine. So this is the part where I like to get a little dramatic. I'm imagining, here's Hagar. She's got to go back to Sarai, whom she hates. These women don't get along. So she's got to march back. All right, I'm back. What do you want me to do for you now? And put a smile on her face, yeah. She's got to endure more suffering with these abusive people. She's got to go back. But she goes back. She has the kid. This is where it gets really fun. The Bible says that who named Ishmael? Abraham. How did he know that name? Hagar told him. So here's little Hagar. The father gets to name the kid in this culture. Here's little Hagar. She's going up to Abraham, who owns 1,000 cattle. This guy's so wealthy. Here's this little Egyptian slave. She's like, bro, Abraham, you're going to listen to me. I may be Egyptian, I may be a slave, but I have seen God. And he's spoken to me. He's given me a promise that's just as good as yours. So listen up, bud. Listen up. His name will be Ishmael. Now, we don't know what that little bedroom discussion looked like. But what we do know is that he listened to her. And he followed the instructions of a slave. Is that crazy? Abraham's like, okay. And Sarai's like, what's the baby's name? It's Ishmael. Where'd you come up with that name? Never mind. Don't ask that question. It's just Ishmael. I just thought of it, okay? I just thought of it. It's like, no, he didn't just think of it. Hagar told him, said, that's my kid, and I get to name him because he's my future. He's not yours. He's mine. And I get to call it. I get to name it. I have authority over it. This is my future. I am God's servant now, and He is going to bless my life with a hope and a future that you cannot steal from me. And this is what God has for all of us, a hope and a future that no one can steal from you. I want to
Oh, give me Jesus.